Picture the most secure room in the Middle East, the subterranean command hub beneath the Kirya military complex in Tel Aviv. Usually it's a hum of real-time battlefield intelligence, secure communications, and absolute control. But this morning, the screens showed something that froze the Israeli security cabinet in its tracks: empty chairs, silent secure lines, and the terrifying realization that Benjamin Netanyahu's 18-month gamble on total security had just violently backfired. I'm Daniel, this is Arsenal Economics, and today we have to talk about the 90-minute window that didn't just breach Israel's air defenses. It fundamentally broke the illusion of command. Let's look at the timeline. At precisely 3:15 a.m., a coordinated wave of projectiles entered Israeli airspace. But this wasn't a standard barrage. Defense analysts looking at the telemetry data are seeing a masterclass in saturation physics. We are talking about a synchronized swarm designed to mathematically overload the Arrow 3 and David's Sling interceptors. When you combine low-altitude drones acting as radar decoys with solid-fueled, maneuverable hypersonic glide vehicles dropping from the upper atmosphere, you aren't just firing weapons. You are launching a math equation that defensive systems simply cannot solve in time. The IDF's architecture caught the vast majority of the threats. That is a technical fact. But an 85% interception rate against a saturation strike still means warheads make landfall. And the ones that did weren't aimed at a random airbase or a border outpost. They were precision-guided directly at a secure compound in northern Tel Aviv. The exact compound where, according to multiple leaked intelligence assessments, the Prime Minister had been holding an inner-circle security briefing just 90 minutes prior. This wasn't an assassination attempt that randomly got lucky. It was an information weapon. By striking that specific coordinate, the adversary wasn't trying to win a tactical skirmish. They were sending a mathematically precise message to the entire region. The defensive umbrella that was promised to make the country untouchable has a ceiling, and they just punched right through it. The narrative of overwhelming deterrence didn't just crack this morning. It collapsed entirely, leaving a massive vacuum at the very top of the command chain. What happens when the leader of a nuclear-armed state goes dark during an active ballistic missile strike? You don't get a press release. You get a terrifying 45-minute void. According to sources deep inside the secondary emergency bunker, the defense minister looked at the military secretary and asked for immediate visual confirmation of the prime minister's status. What followed wasn't a live video feed. It was a 15-second silence, followed by a statement that secure protocols were still establishing a connection. In a modern command and control crisis, 45 minutes without visual confirmation is an eternity. It means one of three things. Either the Prime Minister is incapacitated, he is in a location so secure that standard communications are failing, or the chain of command has fundamentally broken down. While the Israeli cabinet was staring at a blank screen, an even more chilling reaction was happening 6,000 miles away. The secure hotline connecting the IDF headquarters to the Pentagon went completely silent. And it wasn't a technical glitch. Defense Department sources quietly confirmed that Washington ordered a communication freeze. The United States National Security Council was not going to coordinate a military response, share real-time satellite telemetry, or discuss retaliation options until they knew exactly who was holding the launch codes in Tel Aviv. Deterrence relies on absolute clarity, and right now, the American defense establishment is looking at a fog of war that they simply refuse to step into blind. But if Washington was waiting, the global financial algorithms were not. Before the smoke even cleared over the Kirya compound, the Asian derivatives markets opened. High-frequency trading bots don't care about political spin or government gag orders. They scrape data, they calculate risk, and they execute. Within 8 minutes of the Iranian state media claiming the strike, credit default swaps on Israeli sovereign debt spiked 27%. Brent Crude futures surged past $138 a barrel before human regulators could even grab their morning coffee. The global markets aren't pricing in a damaged building. They are actively pricing in the catastrophic vulnerability of a government that just lost its center of gravity. When the algorithms decide your leadership structure is unstable, the economic hemorrhage happens in milliseconds, and no amount of military force can reverse it. Let's talk about what happens when the dust settles and the cameras are off. Inside an undisclosed secondary bunker, a meeting took place that might redefine Israeli political history. We have multiple corroborating leaks confirming that this wasn't a tactical briefing about how to strike back. It was a cold, calculated political triage. The participants, the defense minister, the heads of the Mossad, and the Shin Bet, senior military commanders, were looking at a prime minister who had staked everything on an aura of invincibility and was now absent from the most critical security juncture of the decade. This is where the concept of a soft coup stops being a conspiracy theory and becomes a procedural reality. The permanent security establishment, the people whose job is to ensure the survival of the state regardless of who occupies the prime minister's chair, recognized that the 18-month strategy of overwhelming force had just collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions. And they weren't just talking about it, they were legally preparing for it. While the military commanders were assessing the physical damage, the Attorney General's office was quietly, frantically reviewing Section 16 of the Basic Law. For those who aren't constitutional scholars, Section 16 deals specifically with the temporary incapacitation of a prime minister and the transfer of executive authority. You do not review Section 16 during a routine crisis. You review it when the permanent legal establishment of the government realizes they might have to forcefully transition command codes to the defense minister to prevent a catastrophic power vacuum. They were preparing for a scenario where the man who promised absolute security couldn't even secure his own visual confirmation on a government monitor. But here is the detail that is genuinely keeping the Israeli intelligence apparatus awake right now. It wasn't just Iranian satellites or drone surveillance that timed this strike so perfectly. At exactly 3:31 a.m., roughly 16 minutes after the missiles made impact, a cabinet minister, whose identity is currently under the strictest of military gag orders, sent a text message to a secure group of 23 Knesset members. 3 separate, independent sources have confirmed the contents of that message. It was just 4 words. He was in there. Let the gravity of that sink in. The adversary didn't just guess the location of the inner circle briefing. They had the coordinates. They had the exact 90-minute window, and the immediate reaction from within the Israeli government wasn't to blame a lucky shot. It was the terrifying, instantaneous realization that the inner circle is leaking. This wasn't just a military vulnerability. It was a catastrophic intelligence failure from the inside out. When your own cabinet realizes that the coordinates of your secure briefings are somehow finding their way to the targeting systems of hypersonic glide vehicles, you no longer have a functioning government. You have a compromised bunker. Let's step back and look at the geopolitical shockwave expanding outward from that crater in Tel Aviv. For a decade, the Gulf states that quietly normalized relations with Israel did so for one very specific, pragmatic reason. They weren't looking for a cultural exchange. They were buying into a security umbrella. They saw a technologically supreme, militarily dominant regional power that could effectively counter Iranian influence and anchor the Middle East. But what they are watching today is a country whose leader was just targeted in his own capital, whose military cannot secure its own command hubs, and whose entire doctrine of overwhelming force has been exposed as a strategic illusion. The Saudis, the Emiratis, the Egyptians, they are all recalculating the value proposition of that relationship right now in real time. If the Israeli defense architecture cannot guarantee the physical safety of its own prime minister, it certainly cannot guarantee the security of the Persian Gulf. The Arab states are putting normalization on ice, and European allies are openly discussing distancing themselves from a government that has lost its grip on the escalation ladder. And this brings us to the most dangerous variable in this entire equation, the psychological profile of the man at the center of the crisis. Reports from sources close to the inner circle over the last 6 months describe a leader experiencing what intelligence analysts term a catastrophic stress response. We are talking about someone who built an entire political legacy, an entire identity spanning decades, on being the indispensable, infallible protector of the state. When that identity disintegrates in public, when the strength you projected becomes the exact vulnerability your adversaries exploit, the decision-making process fundamentally alters. Leaders cornered by their own collapsing doctrines don't usually seek diplomatic off-ramps. They look for the one massive move that reestablishes dominance. And in a nuclear-armed state, facing an existential crisis of command, that realization should terrify everyone. The whispers of the Samson Option, the ultimate final resort deterrent, are no longer confined to academic think tanks and historical footnotes. They are active, pressing variables in the Pentagon's calculus this morning. So, where does this leave us? I will be straight with you. The next 72 hours are the most critical window in the modern history of the Middle East. If we go 48 hours without a clear, unassailable public demonstration of command authority, we are looking at the potential collapse of the Israeli government and a chaotic, dangerous scramble for control of the military apparatus. The decisions made this weekend will determine whether we see early elections, a military-led unity government, or a desperate escalation that drags the entire global economy into the abyss. The missile strike was just the trigger. The real damage was the exposure of the illusion. I'll be tracking this minute by minute, monitoring the emergency Knesset sessions, the algorithmic market panic, and the diplomatic backchannels. If you want analysis that cuts through the propaganda and tells you exactly what the math is saying, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Stay sharp, stay critical, and I'll see you in the next one.